Dakota Reeves had been at Millfield Regional High School for exactly 47 days when Cassidy Brennan first shoved her into a locker. The collision sent Dakota's books scattering across the polished linoleum floor of the main hallway, and the metallic clang echoed through the corridor like a gunshot. Students walking nearby paused their conversations, some craning their necks to see what had happened, others quickly averting their eyes and hurrying past. Dakota was 5'6", with auburn hair that caught the fluorescent lights wrong, making it look almost orange under certain angles, particularly in the mornings when the maintenance crew had just finished their cleaning rounds, and everything gleamed with industrial disinfectant. She wore thrift store jeans that had been carefully hemmed by her own hands. Her father had taught her basic sewing skills during one of their many moves, and her father's old Marine Corps T-shirts, which hung loose on her narrow frame. The shirts were faded from years of washing, the emblems cracked but still visible, each one carrying memories of bases they'd lived on before settling in Millfield. What Cassidy and her carefully curated group of followers couldn't see was the rope-burned scars on Dakota's knuckles from years of climbing training ropes in her father's garage gym, or the calluses on her palms from heavy bag work that had started when she was 12 years old and tall enough to reach the bag without standing on a crate. The scars told stories of discipline and dedication that most 17-year-olds couldn't comprehend. Every morning at 5:30, while other teenagers hit snooze buttons and complained about early school schedules, Dakota had been in the garage working through combinations her father called out while drinking his first cup of black coffee. The calluses were earned through thousands of hours of conditioning, until her hands were as tough as leather and her knuckles could split pine boards without flinching. Dakota's family had moved to Millfield after her father's medical discharge from the Marines, a transition that had been complicated by bureaucratic delays, insurance disputes, and the challenge of finding civilian work that could accommodate his injury-related limitations. Staff Sergeant Marcus Reeves now worked third shift at the Millfield Lumber Company, operating machinery in a cavernous warehouse that smelled of sawdust and machine oil. He slept during most daylight hours in their small rental house on Maple Street, where the heating was unreliable and the windows needed recaulking every fall, but the rent was manageable on his disability pension combined with his mill wages. The house sat in a neighborhood of similar working-class homes, each with small yards and driveways cracked from winter freeze-thaw cycles. Their neighbors were mostly older couples whose children had grown and moved away, or single parents working multiple jobs to make ends meet. It wasn't the kind of neighborhood where teenagers threw elaborate birthday parties or families took European vacations, but it was stable, quiet, and safe. Marcus had chosen it specifically for those qualities after too many years of uncertainty. Dakota's mother, Sarah, had died in a car accident when Dakota was 11, leaving father and daughter to navigate the world as a tight unit of two. The accident had happened on a rainy Tuesday evening in October when Sarah was driving home from her job at the base medical facility. A drunk driver had run a red light at the intersection of Base Road and Highway 9, striking Sarah's sedan on the driver's side. She died instantly, according to the police report, though Marcus had never shared that detail with Dakota. The funeral had been held at the base chapel with full military honors, despite Sarah being a civilian employee. Dakota remembered the folded flag, the 21-gun salute, and the way her father's face had looked like it was carved from granite throughout the entire service. She remembered the casseroles that appeared on their kitchen counter for weeks afterward, brought by neighbors and fellow Marines' wives who understood the particular weight of military loss. In the years since Sarah's death, Marcus had taught Dakota to fight, not because he expected her to use it, but because he couldn't always be there to protect her, and because the world had proven itself capable of taking away everything that mattered without warning. Every technique he showed her, every combination they practiced, every lesson in distance and timing was his way of ensuring that his daughter would never be completely helpless, no matter what circumstances she found herself in. "Stay invisible until you graduate," he'd told her on the first day at Millfield Regional, standing in the kitchen while she ate breakfast and he prepared for another sleepless day. "Pick your battles wisely, but remember that some battles pick you whether you want them or not. When that happens, you fight smart, you fight hard, and you end it quickly." The advice came from 2 decades of military experience, from deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, where survival often depended on correctly reading situations and responding appropriately. Marcus had learned to assess threats, identify escape routes, and make tactical decisions under pressure. These were skills he'd hoped his daughter would never need, but ones he was determined to teach her nonetheless. But Dakota's battles seemed to pick her regardless of her intentions to remain unnoticed. Cassidy Brennan ruled her senior class through a combination of inherited wealth, practiced cruelty, and 2 loyal followers, Megan Torres and Ashley Chen. Cassidy's father, Robert Brennan, owned 3 successful car dealerships across the county: Brennan Honda, Brennan Toyota, and the recently acquired Brennan Luxury Motors, which meant Cassidy drove a different vehicle to school each week, rotating between a Honda Civic Si, a Toyota Camry Hybrid, and a BMW 3 Series depending on her mood. The cars were always spotless, always perfectly maintained, and always parked in the premium spots near the main entrance that were theoretically available to any student, but practically reserved for those with enough social capital to claim them. Cassidy never worried about consequences, because consequences, in her experience, were things that happened to other people. Her blonde hair was professionally highlighted every 6 weeks at Salon Mystique, the most expensive styling establishment in Millfield's small downtown district. Her highlights cost more per session than Dakota's father made in 2 days at the lumber mill. Her wardrobe came from boutiques in the state capital, carefully curated ensembles that she planned weeks in advance and photographed for her Instagram account, which had over 3,000 followers, despite Millfield Regional having an enrollment of only 800 students. The targeting of Dakota had started small, almost experimentally, as if Cassidy were testing the boundaries of what she could accomplish without facing pushback. She would bump into Dakota in the computer lab during 3rd period AP Computer Science, a class that required students to save their work frequently because the aging desktop computers had a tendency to freeze without warning. Cassidy's accidental collisions always seemed to happen when Dakota was in the middle of complex coding assignments, causing her to lose unsaved work and forcing her to start sections over again. "Oops," Cassidy would say with manufactured innocence, her voice carrying just enough volume to ensure nearby students witnessed the interaction. "Sorry, I didn't see you there. You're so quiet, it's like you're invisible." The comment about invisibility was particularly calculated because Dakota had been making genuine efforts to avoid drawing attention to herself. She sat in the middle rows of every classroom, neither front nor back. She ate lunch in the library rather than the cafeteria, claiming she needed the quiet space to study. She participated in class discussions when called upon, but didn't volunteer answers or opinions unless specifically asked. Mrs. Henderson's AP Literature class provided another venue for Cassidy's harassment campaign. During group discussions of novels like The Kite Runner or Beloved, when students were encouraged to share personal interpretations and make connections to contemporary issues, Cassidy would whisper comments about Dakota's contributions loud enough for nearby students to hear, but quietly enough to avoid teacher detection. "Easy to talk about social justice when you're living off charity," she'd murmur during a discussion about economic inequality in The Grapes of Wrath. Or, "Must be nice to relate to the outcasts when you are one," when Dakota offered an analysis of alienation in The Catcher in the Rye. These comments were carefully crafted to accomplish multiple objectives simultaneously. They undermined Dakota's academic contributions, reinforced her social isolation, and established Cassidy's dominance over classroom dynamics without crossing lines that would trigger teacher intervention. Mrs. Henderson, a veteran educator in her 50s who had seen countless variations of teenage social dynamics, either didn't notice the harassment or chose not to acknowledge it directly. Group projects became elaborate exercises in social exclusion. When Mrs. Henderson announced that students could form their own teams for the semester-long research assignment on American social movements, Cassidy would organize her allies quickly and efficiently, ensuring that Dakota was left without options. The process appeared organic, friends naturally gravitating toward each other, but was actually carefully orchestrated. "Oh, we already have 3 people," Megan would announce when Dakota approached their table, even though group size limits hadn't been established. "Maybe try that table over there." She'd gesture toward a group of students who were either already complete or obviously incompatible with Dakota's academic abilities. When Dakota eventually found herself assigned to incomplete groups by Mrs. Henderson, Cassidy would complain loudly about Dakota's lack of participation in the project, claiming that Dakota wasn't contributing equally to research or presentation preparation. These complaints were made publicly during class check-ins, designed to humiliate Dakota in front of their peers while creating a paper trail that made Dakota appear to be an inadequate student. The harassment followed a predictable escalation pattern that Marcus would have recognized from his military training on insurgency tactics. First, test the target's defenses and response capabilities. Second, identify vulnerabilities and support systems. Third, increase pressure while maintaining plausible deniability. Fourth, escalate until the target either submits or retaliates, creating opportunities for further attack. By mid-October, Cassidy had progressed to casual verbal harassment in public spaces. Dakota would be walking through the hallways between classes, minding her own business and carrying her books in the canvas messenger bag that had belonged to her mother. When Cassidy would materialize alongside her, with Megan and Ashley flanking her like bodyguards. "She smells like motor oil," Dakota overheard Cassidy telling Megan near the library's quiet study area on a Tuesday afternoon in October. They were sitting at one of the round tables near the biography section, their voices pitched at exactly the volume necessary to ensure Dakota could hear every word from her position 3 tables away. "Probably because her dad's some kind of grease monkey working at that lumber place. I heard he couldn't make it in the real world, so he had to take whatever job would hire him." Dakota's father wasn't a grease monkey, and he hadn't failed to make it in the real world. Staff Sergeant Marcus Reeves had been a hand-to-hand combat instructor for Marines at Camp Pendleton, responsible for training thousands of service members in defensive tactics and close-quarters combat before deployment to active war zones. His students had included Marines who went on to serve with distinction in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other classified locations around the world. His techniques had literally saved lives in combat situations. The end of his military career hadn't come from failure or inadequacy, but from an improvised explosive device hidden in a roadside drainage culvert outside Kandahar, Afghanistan. The explosion had destroyed most of the hearing in his left ear, left him with chronic migraines that could be triggered by sudden changes in barometric pressure or high-stress situations, and caused enough internal damage to his equilibrium that he could no longer meet the physical standards required for active duty service. His transition to civilian employment had been complicated by the fact that his military expertise, small unit tactics, weapons training, combat instruction, didn't translate directly to civilian job markets. The lumber mill position had been the best available option that provided steady income, health benefits, and schedule flexibility that accommodated his medical appointments and therapy sessions. But Dakota didn't correct Cassidy's characterization of her father. Marcus had taught her that sometimes the best response was no response, particularly when dealing with people who were looking for reasons to escalate conflicts. Engaging with bullies often provided them with exactly the reaction they were seeking, evidence that their attacks were having the desired effect. Instead, Dakota continued working on her history homework, taking careful notes on the Industrial Revolution and its impact on American labor movements, while Cassidy's voice carried across the library's quiet atmosphere. "I mean, look at her clothes," Cassidy continued, clearly enjoying the performance. "Everything's from thrift stores or hand-me-downs. That backpack probably belonged to someone else first, too. It's like she's living off everyone else's leftover life." The messenger bag had indeed belonged to someone else first, Dakota's mother, who had carried it during her nursing school classes and later during her work at the base medical facility. Dakota treasured the bag not because she couldn't afford a new one, but because it still carried the faint scent of her mother's perfume, and reminded her of watching Sarah organize medical supplies and study materials on the kitchen table during weekend study sessions. Ashley Chen shifted uncomfortably in her chair during Cassidy's commentary, glancing toward Dakota's table with an expression that suggested guilt or concern. Ashley was the reluctant member of Cassidy's inner circle, someone who seemed to participate more out of fear of becoming a target herself than genuine enjoyment of the harassment campaigns. Ashley's family had moved to Millfield from California 2 years earlier when her father took a position as an engineer at the regional power plant. She was academically accomplished, particularly strong in mathematics and sciences, and generally well-liked by teachers and classmates. Her association with Cassidy appeared to be based more on proximity. They had been assigned as lab partners in chemistry during Ashley's first semester at Millfield than shared interests or values. Megan Torres, by contrast, seemed to genuinely enjoy the social dynamics of exclusion and humiliation. She laughed at Cassidy's comments with apparent delight, adding her own observations and suggestions for future harassment. Megan's father worked as a manager at one of Robert Brennan's car dealerships, which created a professional connection between the families and made Megan's loyalty to Cassidy both social and pragmatic. "We should start a collection," Megan suggested with a giggle, "like a charity drive for Dakota's wardrobe. I bet we could find some really nice clothes for her at the Salvation Army." The harassment escalated significantly in November when Cassidy discovered Dakota's social media accounts. Dakota had been careful to maintain minimal online presence, a basic Instagram account with fewer than 50 followers, mostly family members and a few friends from previous schools. But Cassidy's investigation was thorough and systematic. Within days of finding Dakota's accounts, Cassidy began leaving comments on every photo Dakota had posted over the past 2 years. The comments were crafted to appear humorous to outside observers while being deeply humiliating to Dakota herself. "Who let the rescue dog out?" appeared under a picture of Dakota at her cousin's wedding, where she had been serving as a junior bridesmaid and wearing a dress that her aunt had bought specifically for the occasion. The photo showed Dakota smiling genuinely, surrounded by family members who clearly loved and valued her. But Cassidy's comment reframed the image as something pathetic and unwanted. "Salvation Army called, they want their outfit back," showed up beneath a selfie Dakota had posted after making honor roll at her previous school, a photograph that had originally been taken to share good news with her extended family. Dakota was wearing one of her father's Marine Corps t-shirts in the photo, the same type of shirt she wore regularly to school, and her expression had been one of genuine pride in her academic achievement. The comments accumulated quickly, each one receiving likes from Megan, Ashley, and several other students who were either active supporters of Cassidy's harassment campaign or afraid to oppose it publicly. The social media platform's design amplified the humiliation by sending Dakota notifications each time someone interacted with the comments, ensuring that she was repeatedly reminded of the attacks throughout each day. Dakota deleted the comments as quickly as she discovered them, but screenshots circulated through group chats and private messages among Millfield Regional students. The screenshots were often shared without context, making it appear that Dakota was simply the target of random online criticism rather than the victim of a coordinated harassment campaign. Someone created a fake Instagram account called Millfield Charity Case that posted daily updates about Dakota's outfits, complete with price estimates from local thrift stores and commentary about her appearance, academic performance, and family situation. The account gained over 200 followers within its first week, including students Dakota had never spoken to, but who apparently found entertainment value in her public humiliation. The fake account's posts were sophisticated in their cruelty, combining actual photographs taken secretly during school hours with fabricated information designed to maximize embarrassment. One post featured a photo of Dakota eating lunch alone in the library, accompanied by text that read, "Day 73 of the Millfield Charity Case. Chronicles, still no friends, still wearing dead mom's clothes, still smells like discount laundry detergent. Updates to follow." The reference to Dakota's mother was particularly devastating because it demonstrated that Cassidy had conducted research into Dakota's family background, possibly accessing school records or questioning other students for personal information. The casual mention of her mother's death in the context of mockery felt like a violation of something sacred, transforming grief into entertainment for anonymous online observers. Dakota made her Instagram account private and blocked the fake accounts she could identify, but the harassment had already spread beyond platforms she could control. Students would reference the fake account's posts during in-person conversations, making jokes about charity case updates, or asking if she was accepting donations for new clothes. The school's anti-bullying policy, outlined in the student handbook that every family received at the beginning of each academic year, required documentation of 3 separate incidents before administration could take formal action. The policy had been developed in response to state legislation mandating anti-bullying measures in public schools, but its implementation was complicated by the difficulty of documenting harassment that occurred across multiple platforms and locations. Dakota reported the social media harassment to her guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, during a scheduled meeting in mid-November. Mrs. Patterson was a well-intentioned woman in her early 40s who genuinely cared about student welfare, but was overwhelmed by the caseload of over 300 students assigned to her guidance responsibilities. "I understand this must be very difficult for you," Mrs. Patterson said, reviewing the screenshots Dakota had printed out as evidence. "These comments are certainly inappropriate and hurtful. However, I need to explain that off-campus cyberbullying falls into a gray area in terms of school jurisdiction unless direct threats are made." Mrs. Patterson's office was located in the main administrative suite, decorated with motivational posters about college planning and career development. Her desk was covered with college brochures, scholarship applications, and student files that required attention. Despite her genuine concern for Dakota's situation, she was operating within a bureaucratic framework that prioritized documentation and procedural compliance over immediate intervention. "Have they threatened you physically?" Mrs. Patterson asked, consulting a checklist that helped her determine appropriate response protocols. "Not exactly," Dakota admitted, recognizing that her answer would limit the school's ability to take action. "Have they damaged your personal property or interfered with your ability to attend classes?" "They've caused me to lose computer work, but that could be considered accidental." Then we'll need to monitor the situation and document any future incidents that rise to the level of actionable harassment. In the meantime, I'd recommend avoiding engagement with these students and focusing on the positive relationships you're building here at Millfield. Mrs. Patterson's advice was well-intentioned but impractical, since Dakota couldn't avoid attending classes with Cassidy, Megan, and Ashley, and she hadn't yet succeeded in building positive relationships that could provide social protection against the harassment campaign. The situation escalated beyond social media attacks and classroom harassment during the week before Thanksgiving break, when Dakota found herself targeted for what Cassidy apparently considered the final phase of her campaign. The day before Thanksgiving break, Dakota was leaving the auditorium after drama club practice when she discovered that her routine had been observed and anticipated. Drama club met every Tuesday and Thursday in the old auditorium, a facility that had been built in the 1960s as part of the school's original construction project. The building's age showed in details like loose handrails, inconsistent lighting, and ventilation systems that struggled to maintain comfortable temperatures during Michigan's harsh winters. Dakota had joined drama club not because she had any particular interest in theater, but because it provided a structured activity that kept her at school until her father's shift ended, eliminating the need for him to arrange transportation during his limited sleep hours. The club was small, only 12 regular members, and focused primarily on technical aspects of theater production rather than acting. Dakota had discovered she had an aptitude for lighting design and sound engineering, skills that translated well from her experience helping her father with electrical work around their house. The auditorium stairs were old concrete, built during an era when safety railings were more suggestion than legal requirement. The stairwell connected the main auditorium level to the basement area where the drama department stored costumes, props, and technical equipment. Students typically used the main hallway stairs to move between floors, but drama club members often cut through the auditorium to reach the parking lot, particularly during winter months when the route provided some protection from weather. When Dakota emerged from the auditorium after helping Mr. Rodriguez, the drama teacher, organize lighting equipment for the fall production of Our Town, she found Cassidy, Megan, and Ashley waiting in the stairwell like they had been positioned there specifically to intercept her. Their presence in this location at this time was clearly not coincidental. Someone had been monitoring Dakota's schedule and planning this confrontation. "Well, well," Cassidy said, blocking Dakota's path toward the main floor. Her voice carried the confident malice that had become familiar over the past several weeks. "If it isn't our little charity case." Cassidy was wearing a designer winter coat that probably cost more than Dakota's father's monthly paycheck, perfectly applied makeup despite the late hour, and boots that were clearly more fashionable than functional. Her positioning at the top of the stairwell was deliberate and strategic, creating a situation where Dakota would have to physically push past her or retreat back into the auditorium. Dakota tried to step around them, but Megan moved to block her path. The stairwell was narrow, designed for foot traffic in both directions, but barely wide enough for two people to pass comfortably. With three people positioned to obstruct movement, there was no easy way for Dakota to exit without confrontation. "We need to talk," Ashley said, though her voice lacked Cassidy's confident malice and carried undertones of reluctance or discomfort. Ashley had always been the most hesitant participant in their harassment campaigns, someone who seemed to follow Cassidy's lead more out of fear than enthusiasm. "I'm trying to leave," Dakota said, keeping her voice steady and controlled. Her father had taught her that showing fear or anger could escalate confrontational situations, while maintaining calm dignity often confused aggressors and created opportunities for de-escalation. "You're trying to ruin my reputation," Cassidy shot back, her voice rising in pitch and volume. "Telling lies to Mrs. Patterson about harassment and bullying, making up stories about innocent comments and normal social interactions. "I never mentioned your name in any of my reports," Dakota replied honestly. She had been careful to describe incidents and behaviors without specifically identifying the individuals involved, hoping to address the harassment without creating additional reasons for retaliation. "Don't play stupid with me," Cassidy said, stepping closer and forcing Dakota to take a step backward toward the stairwell edge. "You think we don't know exactly what you're trying to do? Running to counselors and administrators because you can't handle a little teasing? Trying to get us in trouble because you're too pathetic to fight your own battles?" Dakota felt her phone buzz in her pocket, a text message that was probably from her father, indicating he was leaving work early to pick her up from drama club practice. Marcus often monitored his phone during slow periods at the lumber mill, and he made an effort to coordinate transportation timing so Dakota wouldn't have to wait outside in cold weather. If she could stall this confrontation for 10 or 15 minutes, her father would arrive in the parking lot and honk the horn of their aging pickup truck, providing her with a legitimate reason to end the conversation and leave immediately. "Look," Dakota said, attempting to project reasonable compromise, "I don't want any trouble with you or your friends. Can we just agree to pretend we never saw each other and go our separate ways?" "Too late for that," Cassidy replied, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had been planning this moment and was pleased that it was unfolding according to her expectations. "You already made this our problem when you decided to go crying to adults instead of handling your business like a mature person." She stepped closer again, forcing Dakota back toward the stairs. Dakota could feel the edge of the top step behind her heel, 17 concrete steps that dropped to the basement level where they connected to the drama department's storage rooms. During regular school hours, the area bustled with activity from classes, rehearsals, and maintenance workers. But after school it was empty, except for the occasional janitor making rounds. "Handle my business how?" Dakota asked, genuinely curious about what alternative approach Cassidy thought would have been appropriate for addressing systematic harassment and social media attacks. "By accepting that some people are better than others," Cassidy said with a smile that was both beautiful and cruel. "By understanding your place in the social order and staying there quietly instead of trying to cause trouble for people who are clearly above your level." "Cassidy, maybe we should—" Ashley started, her voice carrying obvious discomfort with the direction the conversation was taking. "Shut up!" Megan interrupted sharply. "She needs to learn her lesson, and we're the ones who are going to teach it to her." Megan had positioned herself to Dakota's left, blocking any escape route in that direction, while Ashley remained slightly behind Cassidy, apparently reluctant to participate actively, but unwilling to intervene on Dakota's behalf. "Learn what lesson exactly?" Dakota asked, though she was beginning to understand that this conversation was not intended to reach a peaceful resolution. "That actions have consequences," Cassidy said with evident satisfaction. "You want to cry to counselors about bullying and harassment? Let me show you what real bullying looks like. Let me give you something legitimate to complain about." Dakota realized with crystalline clarity that Cassidy intended to physically attack her in this isolated stairwell, probably with the intention of making the attack appear accidental. A fall down concrete stairs could easily be described as a tragic accident, particularly if the three witnesses told consistent stories about Dakota losing her footing or tripping over her own backpack. The realization triggered training protocols that Marcus had drilled into her during countless hours in their garage gym, assess the threat level, identify escape routes, determine whether de-escalation remained possible, prepare for physical defense if necessary. But before Dakota could implement any of those tactical considerations, Cassidy shoved her hard in the chest with both hands. The push was powerful, deliberate, and precisely aimed to send Dakota backward down the stairs. Cassidy had clearly planned this action, possibly researching how much force would be necessary to cause someone Dakota's size to lose their balance and fall. Dakota had been trained for situations exactly like this one. Her father had spent countless hours teaching her how to fall safely, how to roll and absorb impact, how to protect her head and vital organs when thrown off balance unexpectedly. They had practiced falling techniques on wrestling mats, on grass, on various surfaces that might be encountered in real-world self-defense scenarios. But training scenarios hadn't accounted for concrete stairs at awkward angles, or the way a backpack full of textbooks could shift your center of gravity at exactly the wrong moment, or the adrenaline surge that could interfere with muscle memory when facing genuine danger rather than controlled practice. Dakota's left foot slipped off the step as she tried to regain her balance. She twisted desperately, trying to catch herself on the railing that ran along the left side of the stairwell, but the old metal rail was loose from decades of use and gave way under her grip with a sharp metallic snap that echoed through the empty corridor. She tumbled backward, her right shoulder hitting the third step hard enough to send shockwaves of pain through her entire arm. Her head bounced off the fifth step with a sound like a melon dropping on pavement. Her left arm caught under her body weight on the seventh step, with a crack like a branch snapping under pressure. The textbooks in her backpack scattered around her as she rolled and bounced down the remaining stairs, pages fluttering like injured birds. Her body finally came to rest at the bottom of the stairwell in a twisted heap, surrounded by scattered homework assignments, loose papers, and the broken pieces of her mother's messenger bag. The silence that followed lasted maybe 3 seconds, though it felt like hours to Dakota, who was struggling to understand why her body wasn't responding to her commands to get up and assess her injuries. "Oh, shit," Megan whispered, her voice small and frightened in a way that suggested she hadn't fully anticipated the potential consequences of their actions. "Dakota?" Ashley called down the stairwell, her voice rising in panic. "Dakota, are you okay? Can you hear me?" Dakota tried to respond, but when she opened her mouth, only a wheeze came out. Her left arm was bent at an angle that arms weren't supposed to bend, creating a visual that made her stomach lurch with nausea. Her right ankle throbbed with each heartbeat, sending waves of pain up her leg that suggested significant damage. Something warm and wet trickled down the back of her neck, pooling beneath her head on the cold concrete floor. Most concerning was the way her vision kept blurring in and out of focus, and the strange ringing in her ears that made it difficult to process the voices coming from the top of the stairs. She recognized the symptoms from health class discussions about concussions, but knowing the medical terminology didn't make the experience any less terrifying. "We need to get help," Ashley said, her voice stronger now, more decisive. "She's really hurt. We need to call 911 right now." "No!" Cassidy snapped, her voice sharp with panic and calculation. "We need to get out of here before someone finds us. We weren't even here. This never happened." "Cassidy, look at her arm. Is not our problem," Cassidy interrupted. "She fell down the stairs. Accidents happen all the time. Old buildings, loose railings, people not watching where they're going." "But we were here. We were talking to her." "No, we weren't. We left drama club practice early and went straight to the parking lot. We never saw her. We don't know anything about any accident." Dakota heard footsteps retreating up the stairs, 3 sets of feet moving quickly away from the scene. She tried to call out, to ask them not to leave her alone in the empty basement, but her voice wouldn't work properly. Her breathing was shallow and labored, and each attempt to speak triggered waves of pain through her chest and ribcage. She fumbled for her phone with her right hand, the only limb that seemed to be functioning somewhat normally. But the device had skittered across concrete floor during her fall and come to rest under a pile of scattered papers several feet away from her current position. Moving toward the phone required rolling onto her side, which triggered lightning bolts of agony through her left arm and shoulder. The pain was so intense that her vision went completely white for several seconds, and she had to stop moving and focus on breathing until the worst of it passed. By the time she managed to reach her phone, her hands were shaking so badly from shock and pain that she could barely operate the touch screen. She managed to unlock the device and navigate to her father's contact information, but when she tried to dial his number, her fingers kept slipping on the screen controls. The basement area grew darker as afternoon sunlight faded, and the building's automatic lighting systems were programmed for daytime occupancy rather than evening activities. Dakota lay on the cold concrete floor for 22 minutes before Mr. Jameson, the night janitor, found her during his routine security check of the building. "Jesus Christ," he said, when he discovered her at the bottom of the stairwell. Mr. Jameson was a Vietnam veteran in his 70s who had worked at Millfield Regional for over 15 years. He had seen his share of student injuries, sports accidents, chemistry lab mishaps, the occasional fight, but nothing quite like this. He immediately called 911 from his radio, then knelt beside Dakota to assess her condition while providing reassurance. "Help is coming, sweetheart. Just stay still and try to stay awake. Can you tell me your name?" "Dakota," she whispered. "Dakota Reeves." "Okay, Dakota. I'm Bill Jameson. I'm going to stay right here with you until the paramedics arrive. Can you tell me what happened?" Dakota opened her mouth to explain about Cassidy and the confrontation, but the effort of speaking was exhausting, and she wasn't sure how much of the story she should share with a stranger. "I fell," she said finally. "Looks like you fell pretty hard. That railing's been loose for months. I've been telling maintenance to fix it, but you know how these things go. Always something else that's more urgent." The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens, questions Dakota couldn't answer coherently, and medical professionals working efficiently around her broken body. The EMTs cut away her father's Marine Corps t-shirt to assess her injuries, apologizing for destroying the garment while explaining that they needed access to check for additional trauma. The shirt had been one of Marcus's favorites, worn during training sessions and weekend projects, soft from years of washing and carrying memories of better times. Watching it fall away in pieces felt like losing another connection to stability and safety. Her father met them at Millfield General Hospital, still wearing his work uniform and safety boots, his hair disheveled from rushing out of the lumber mill without stopping to change clothes. The scent of sawdust and machine oil clung to his clothing, mixing with the antiseptic hospital smell in a way that was both comforting and surreal. When Marcus saw Dakota on the gurney, his face went through several expressions in quick succession: fear, anger, relief, and finally the controlled calm he'd perfected during 2 tours in Afghanistan when receiving casualty reports or dealing with crisis situations. He'd learned to compartmentalize emotions in order to function effectively under pressure, a skill that served him well during civilian emergencies as well as military ones. "How bad is it?" he asked the attending physician doctor. Sarah Martinez, who had been working in emergency medicine for over a decade and had treated countless accident victims. "We're still running tests and x-rays, but from initial examination, she has a compound fracture of the left radius, a dislocated shoulder, probable concussion, and significant trauma to her right ankle. We'll know more once we get imaging results." The damage assessment took 4 hours and involved multiple specialists consulting on different aspects of Dakota's injuries. The compound fracture required immediate surgical intervention to set the bones properly and prevent infection. The dislocated shoulder needed to be relocated under sedation. The concussion required neurological monitoring to ensure there was no brain swelling or other complications. The final medical report listed compound fracture of the left radius requiring surgical repair, dislocated shoulder, grade 2 concussion with temporary cognitive impairment, severe bruising along her ribs and back, consistent with impact trauma, hairline crack in her right ankle, and multiple lacerations requiring sutures. She's lucky the head injury wasn't more severe, Dr. Martinez explained to Marcus during one of their consultations. Falls down concrete stairs can easily result in skull fractures or traumatic brain injuries. The concussion she sustained is serious but manageable with proper rest and monitoring. How did this happen? Marcus asked during one of the quiet periods between nurses checking vital signs and adjusting IV medications. Dakota told him about leaving drama club practice, about the loose railing giving way when she tried to catch herself, about losing her footing on the old concrete stairs. She didn't mention Cassidy, Megan, or Ashley. Not yet. The story she told was technically accurate. She had fallen down the stairs when the railing failed, but it omitted crucial details about why she had been off balance in the first place. Marcus listened carefully, his trained eye noting details that civilian observers might miss. The positioning of her injuries wasn't entirely consistent with a simple fall. The bruising on her chest and shoulders suggested she had been pushed or struck from the front, rather than simply losing her balance, but he didn't press for additional information, while Dakota was still sedated and recovering from surgery. There would be time for more detailed discussions once she was stable and thinking clearly. "The school called while you were in surgery," Marcus said. "Principal Morrison sends his regards and says they're reviewing safety protocols for all the stairwells in the building. Apparently that railing's been loose for months, and they're treating this as a maintenance failure that could have been prevented." Dakota nodded weakly, grateful that the school administration was focusing on infrastructure problems rather than investigating the circumstances that led to her being in that stairwell at that particular time. Dakota spent 5 days in the hospital, during which she received visits from several teachers, a few classmates she barely knew who felt obligated to make appearances, and Mrs. Patterson, who brought flowers and expressed the school's concern for her recovery. Notably absent from her visitor list were Cassidy, Megan, and Ashley, none of whom attempted to contact her or acknowledge the accident in any way. She came home the day after Thanksgiving with her left arm in a cast from wrist to shoulder, a walking boot on her right foot, and strict medical instructions to avoid physical activity for at least 8 weeks. The concussion had left her with headaches that made reading difficult and concentration nearly impossible, which meant she'd have to rely on audiobooks and note-taking assistance to keep up with her classes when she returned to school. The cast was decorated with signatures from family members and well-wishers, but most of the white surface remained blank, a visual reminder of how few close relationships she'd managed to build during her time at Millfield Regional. Marcus took family leave from the lumber mill to care for her, which meant their already tight finances became even more strained. The hospital bills would eventually total over $30,000, even with his military insurance covering most of the major expenses. The lost wages from his time off work added another layer of financial pressure to their household budget. "We'll figure it out," he assured Dakota when she apologized for the expense during one of her more lucid moments. "That's what family does. We take care of each other, no matter what it costs." Their small house on Maple Street became a recovery center, with the living room rearranged to accommodate Dakota's medical needs. Marcus set up a hospital bed borrowed from the VA, positioned near the window, so she could see outside during the long hours when sleep was impossible, due to pain medication schedules and concussion protocols. During her recovery, Dakota had plenty of time to think, to analyze the events that had led to her injuries, and to plan for her eventual return to school. She replayed the confrontation with Cassidy over and over, examining every word, every gesture, every detail she could remember. The more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that the attack had been premeditated, carefully planned to appear accidental, while causing maximum physical and social damage. Cassidy had chosen the location specifically because it was isolated and dangerous. She had timed the confrontation to occur when Dakota was alone and vulnerable. She had positioned herself and her friends to prevent escape. Most importantly, Cassidy had walked away from the scene without attempting to get help, demonstrating a callous disregard for human consequences that went far beyond typical teenage cruelty. Dakota wasn't just angry about the physical assault, she was angry about the months of systematic harassment that had preceded it, the social media attacks that had humiliated her in front of the entire school community, the classroom harassment that had undermined her academic performance and social connections. The way Cassidy had calculated every move to stay just inside the boundaries of what the school considered actionable while making Dakota's daily life miserable. Most of all, Dakota was angry about the financial burden her injuries had placed on her father, a man who had already sacrificed his military career and his physical health in service to his country, and who was now working third-shift manual labor to pay medical bills for injuries that weren't his daughter's fault. During her third week of recovery, when the pain medication had been reduced enough for her to think clearly, Dakota asked Marcus to teach her to fight left-handed. "Your arm's still healing," he pointed out, examining the cast that covered most of her left side. "The doctors said no physical activity until at least January." "My right arm works fine," Dakota replied, "and I need to know how to defend myself with whatever I have available." Marcus studied his daughter's face, recognizing an expression he'd seen before in the mirror during particularly difficult periods in Afghanistan. It was the look of someone who had been victimized and was no longer willing to accept that status passively. "Dakota, I understand you're frustrated about what happened." "I'm not frustrated," she interrupted. "I'm ready." "Ready for what?" "To make sure this never happens again. To anyone." Marcus sat down in the chair beside her hospital bed, considering his response carefully. He'd spent years training Marines for combat situations, teaching them to channel anger and fear into effective action while maintaining tactical discipline. He recognized that Dakota was experiencing the same psychological transformation that occurred in soldiers after their first exposure to genuine violence. "Okay," he said finally, "but we do this right. No shortcuts, no rushing the process, and you don't use any of these skills unless you absolutely have to. Understood?" "I mean it, Dakota. Violence is always a last resort, never a first option. But if someone forces you into a situation where you have no other choice, you need to be prepared to end it quickly and decisively." "I know." They started with footwork and movement patterns, since Dakota could practice basic techniques without putting stress on her healing bones. Marcus had converted their garage into a basic gym years earlier, with heavy bags, speed bags, and wrestling mats covering the concrete floor. During Dakota's recovery, it became their classroom for lessons that went far beyond physical techniques. "Fighting isn't about being tough or aggressive," Marcus explained during their first formal lesson. "It's about being smart, disciplined, and strategic. You study your opponent. You identify weaknesses and patterns. You create opportunities rather than waiting for them to appear." Dakota learned to throw straight punches with her right hand while keeping her left arm protected and immobile. She practiced kicks with her good leg while maintaining balance despite the limitations imposed by her ankle injury. Most importantly, she learned to think tactically about confrontation scenarios. 3 opponents is usually an insurmountable problem, Marcus told her during one of their training sessions. But 3 opponents who aren't expecting any resistance, that can become a tactical advantage if you handle it correctly. How? People who have never been in real fights make assumptions about how confrontations unfold. They expect victims to remain victims, to follow predictable patterns of fear and submission. When someone responds with unexpected competence, it creates confusion and hesitation that you can exploit. Marcus taught her about distance management, timing, target selection, and the psychological aspects of violence that most civilians never considered. He explained how to read body language for signs of impending attack, how to position herself to limit an opponent's options, and how to end conflicts quickly before they could escalate beyond her ability to control. By Christmas break, Dakota's cast had been replaced with a removable brace that allowed her to use her left arm for light activities. The walking boot was gone, replaced by a supportive wrap that protected her ankle while permitting normal movement. The concussion symptoms had mostly faded, though she still experienced occasional headaches during periods of stress or intense concentration. Physically, she was healing ahead of schedule. Mentally, she was planning for her return to school and the inevitable confrontation with Cassidy that would determine whether her time at Millfield Regional would continue to be defined by victimization or something else entirely. The school's investigation into her accident had concluded exactly as she had expected. The loose railing was classified as an infrastructure failure that could have happened to any student. Maintenance protocols were reviewed, warning signs were posted about reporting safety hazards, and the incident was officially closed as a tragic accident that resulted in valuable lessons about building maintenance and student safety. No one had interviewed the students who were present during drama club practice that day. No one had examined the timing of Dakota's departure from the building or questioned why she'd been using the auditorium stairs rather than the main hallway. No one had considered whether the fall might have been anything other than accidental. When Dakota returned to school in January, she found that her extended absence had created a kind of social reset. Students who had previously avoided her out of fear of Cassidy's retaliation now seemed genuinely concerned about her recovery and curious about her experiences. Teachers made accommodations for her missed work and offered additional support for catching up with coursework. Cassidy and her friends had expected Dakota to transfer schools, drop out, or at least return as a broken and submissive victim who had learned her place in the social hierarchy. Instead, Dakota appeared almost confident, making eye contact in hallways, participating actively in class discussions, and carrying herself with a kind of quiet authority that hadn't been present before her injuries. "Look who's back," Cassidy said on Dakota's first day returning to classes, intercepting her near the computer lab where their confrontations had originally begun. "How's the arm?" Dakota looked at Cassidy calmly, noting details she hadn't paid attention to before. Cassidy's positioning relative to the hallway traffic flow, the distance between them and potential witnesses, the body language that indicated Cassidy was testing whether Dakota's psychological state had changed during her absence. "Getting stronger every day," Dakota replied, her voice carrying undertones that hadn't been there before her accident. Something in her tone made Cassidy take a half-step backward, though she probably wasn't consciously aware of the movement. Predators developed instincts for detecting changes in their prey, and Cassidy was sensing that the dynamic between them had shifted in ways she didn't fully understand. "Good," Cassidy said, trying to re-establish her psychological dominance. "Maybe next time you'll watch where you're going on those old stairs." "Oh, I'll definitely be more careful about who's behind me when I'm near dangerous places," Dakota replied, her voice pleasant and conversational, while her words carried implications that made Cassidy's eyes narrow with suspicion. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing specific, just general safety advice. You never know when someone might accidentally create a dangerous situation for another person." The exchange lasted less than 30 seconds, but it established a new framework for their relationship. Cassidy was no longer dealing with a victim who would accept harassment passively. She was dealing with someone who had been hurt badly and was no longer afraid of the consequences of standing up for herself. For the next 3 weeks, Dakota played the part of a recovering accident victim, attending physical therapy appointments, using her injury as an excuse to avoid certain activities, and generally appearing to pose no threat to anyone. But she was watching, learning, and identifying patterns in Cassidy's behavior that would be useful when the time came for a more direct confrontation. Cassidy's routine was predictable because privilege and confidence bred complacency. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she stayed after school for student council meetings in the conference room near the main administrative offices. The meetings typically ran until 4:30, after which she would stop by her locker to collect materials for homework, then cut through the computer lab to reach the parking lot where Megan would be waiting in her car. This pattern had been consistent since the beginning of the school year, and Dakota had observed it carefully during her first months at Millfield Regional. Cassidy's post-meeting routine was so reliable that other students had learned to expect her presence in certain areas at specific times. Ashley had been behaving differently since Dakota's accident, exhibiting signs of guilt and discomfort that suggested she was struggling with her role in the events that had led to Dakota's injuries. She avoided eye contact in hallways, seemed uncomfortable during classes they shared, and had stopped participating actively in Cassidy's harassment campaigns against other students. Dakota suspected that Ashley was experiencing psychological consequences from witnessing the results of their stairwell confrontation, possibly including nightmares, anxiety, or other stress responses that accompanied involvement in violence. This psychological stress might make Ashley unreliable as an ally for Cassidy if future conflicts developed. On the last Thursday in January, Dakota decided it was time to implement the plan she had been developing during her recovery period. She positioned herself in the computer lab at 4:25, choosing a workstation near the back exit that provided good visibility of both entrances while offering multiple escape routes if the situation developed in unexpected ways. The computer lab closed officially at 4:30, but the doors weren't locked until 5. And students with legitimate academic needs were generally permitted to work until the custodial staff began their evening cleaning routines. At exactly 4:31, Cassidy entered the lab through the main door, talking loudly into her phone about weekend plans involving parties that Dakota knew she wouldn't be invited to attend. Cassidy was alone. Ashley had apparently skipped the student council meeting, and Megan was waiting in the parking lot as usual. "I know, right?" Cassidy was saying to whoever was on the other end of her phone conversation. "She thinks she's so tough now with her little injury story, but she's still the same pathetic charity case she always was. Nothing's actually changed." She stopped talking abruptly when she noticed Dakota working at one of the computers, her fingers poised over the keyboard as if she had been typing before Cassidy's arrival interrupted her concentration. "I'll call you back," Cassidy said, ending her phone call and slipping the device into her designer purse. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, approaching Dakota's workstation with the confidence of someone who had never faced serious consequences for aggressive behavior. "Using the computer," Dakota said, without looking up from the screen, where she had a document open that appeared to be homework for her AP literature class. "It's a computer lab. This lab closes at 4:30. You're not supposed to be here. The door was unlocked. I have legitimate academic work to complete." Cassidy moved closer to Dakota's position, entering the personal space zone that typically made people uncomfortable and submissive. "You're not supposed to be here after hours without supervision." "Neither are you," Dakota pointed out calmly. "I'm on student council. I have permission to be in the building after hours for official business." Dakota finally looked up from the computer screen, making direct eye contact with Cassidy for the first time since her return to school. Her gaze was steady and unflinching, carrying a kind of calm intensity that made Cassidy pause mid-sentence. "Do you have permission to push people downstairs?" Dakota asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them, like smoke from a discharged weapon. Cassidy's facial expression went through several rapid changes: surprise, fear, calculation, and finally practiced innocence as she attempted to regain control of the conversation. "I don't know what you're talking about," Cassidy said, but her voice lacked the confident malice it had carried moments earlier. "Sure you do," Dakota replied, standing up slowly from her chair. She moved carefully, favoring her left arm just enough to appear vulnerable while positioning herself strategically between Cassidy and the lab's main exit. "You, Megan, and Ashley. The auditorium stairwell, right before Thanksgiving break. You fell down those old stairs because the railing was broken. It was an accident. After you shoved me. Prove it." Dakota smiled, and it wasn't a particularly pleasant expression. It was the smile of someone who had spent weeks planning for this exact moment and was pleased that it was finally unfolding according to her expectations. "I don't have to prove it," she said calmly. "I just have to return the favor." Cassidy took a step backward, her body language shifting from aggressive confidence to defensive wariness. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm stating an intention. You can't touch me. My father will have you arrested. He has connections with the police department and the district attorney's office." "For what?" "Having an accident." The echo of her own words from their stairwell confrontation made Cassidy's eyes widen with understanding. She was beginning to realize that Dakota had been planning this confrontation for weeks, possibly months, and that her usual advantages, social status, family wealth, institutional connections, might not protect her in this situation. Cassidy reached for her phone, probably intending to call for help or document the encounter, but Dakota was faster and more decisive. She grabbed Cassidy's wrist with her right hand, the strong hand, the one that had been training daily in her father's garage, and applied just enough pressure to make Cassidy drop the phone without causing lasting damage. The grip demonstrated something that Cassidy had never experienced before, the feeling of being physically overpowered by someone she had considered weak and helpless. The pressure on her wrist was precisely calibrated, professional in its application, suggesting that Dakota's capabilities had changed significantly during her absence from school. "Let go of me," Cassidy demanded, trying to pull away from Dakota's grip. "Like you let go of me on the stairs when I was trying to leave." Dakota released Cassidy's wrist and stepped back, giving her space to retrieve her phone from the floor. The release was deliberate, calculated to create a moment when Cassidy would be off balance and vulnerable, focused on recovering her device rather than defending herself. The moment Cassidy bent down to pick up her phone, Dakota struck. It wasn't a wild emotional swing driven by anger or revenge. It was a precise, controlled response, a textbook straight cross-punch thrown with proper form and exact targeting. Dakota's fist connected with the left side of Cassidy's jaw, just below the ear, with exactly the amount of force necessary to drop her to one knee without causing permanent damage. The strike was the culmination of months of training, thousands of repetitions practiced on heavy bags and focus mitts under her father's careful instruction. Every element was executed correctly. The rotation of her hips to generate power, the alignment of her wrist and knuckles at impact, the follow-through that ensured maximum energy transfer. Cassidy collapsed to her knees on the computer lab floor, one hand pressed to her face, staring up at Dakota with a combination of shock, pain, and disbelief. She had never been hit before, not in anger, not in self-defense, not even accidentally during childhood play. The experience of physical vulnerability was completely foreign to her. "You psycho!" Cassidy gasped, her voice distorted by the swelling that was already beginning along her jawline. "You broke my jaw!" "It's not broken," Dakota replied calmly, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who understood exactly how much force she had applied and what the results would be. If it was broken, you wouldn't be able to talk clearly. Cassidy tried to stand up, but Dakota placed a firm hand on her shoulder, guiding her back down to the floor. The pressure wasn't violent, but it was unmistakably controlling, demonstrating that Dakota was now dictating the terms of their interaction. "Here's what's going to happen," Dakota said, kneeling beside Cassidy so they could speak at eye level. "You're going to stop all of it. The comments, the social media harassment, the whisper campaigns, the group exclusion tactics. You're going to tell your friends to stop. And if I even suspect you're planning any kind of retaliation against me or anyone else, I'm going to explain to everyone exactly how I ended up at the bottom of those stairs." "Nobody will believe you," Cassidy said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe not," Dakota conceded. "But they'll definitely believe the security footage." Cassidy's eyes widened with genuine fear for the first time during their confrontation. "What security footage?" "The camera in the auditorium hallway," Dakota said with complete confidence. "It doesn't cover the stairwell directly, but it shows the three of you following me toward the stairs at exactly 4:33 p.m. on November 22nd. And it shows all three of you running away from the area at 4:35 p.m., 2 minutes before Mr. Jameson found me at the bottom of the stairwell." This was a complete fabrication. Dakota had checked extensively during her recovery period and confirmed that the auditorium security camera had been broken for months before her accident. But Cassidy didn't know that, and her guilty conscience was making the lie seem plausible. "You're lying," Cassidy whispered, but her voice carried no confidence. "Am I?" Dakota asked. "Do you want to find out what happens when I turn that footage over to the police? Because what you did wasn't bullying or harassment, Cassidy. It was assault and battery, aggravated assault and battery, since I was seriously injured as a result of your actions." Dakota leaned closer, keeping her voice low and conversational while delivering information that would reshape Cassidy's understanding of her legal vulnerability. "My medical bills totaled $37,000. My father had to take unpaid family leave to care for me, which cost our family an additional $4,000 in lost wages. We had to get a second mortgage on our house to cover the expenses. The total financial damage from your little stairwell game is over $40,000. These numbers were accurate, representing the real cost of Dakota's injuries to her family's financial stability. Marcus had tried to shield her from the full extent of their money problems, but Dakota had seen the hospital bills, the insurance statements, and the mortgage documents. "So believe me when I tell you that destroying your social life would be the least I'm willing to do for justice," Dakota continued. "Criminal charges for aggravated assault, a civil lawsuit for damages, and public exposure of what you really are. That's what you're facing if you don't end this harassment campaign immediately and permanently." "I could have you expelled for hitting me," Cassidy said, grasping for some form of leverage. "Go ahead," Dakota replied. "Explain to Principal Morrison why you were alone in a computer lab after hours with the student you've been systematically harassing for months. Explain why you didn't immediately report this unprovoked attack to security. Explain why you're not calling the police right now, if you're really the victim here." Dakota stood up and shouldered her backpack, preparing to leave while Cassidy remained on the floor. "Here's the thing about bullies that you probably never realized," she said. "You're only dangerous when people believe you're untouchable. But everybody saw me break my arm falling downstairs, and everybody's going to see you walking around with a bruised face tomorrow. They're going to do the math." She walked toward the computer lab's exit, then paused at the door for one final comment. "Oh, and Cassidy? If anything happens to Ashley because she's feeling guilty about what you made her do, I'll hold you personally responsible for that too. She didn't want to be in that stairwell, and we both know it." Dakota left Cassidy sitting on the floor of the computer lab, one hand pressed to her swelling jaw, staring at her phone and trying to decide whether calling for help would create more problems than it would solve. The next morning, Cassidy appeared at school wearing carefully applied makeup that couldn't quite conceal the bruising along her jawline. When classmates asked about the injury, she claimed she had walked into a door while getting ready for school in the dark. The explanation was met with polite acceptance, though several students exchanged glances that suggested they found the story less than convincing. More importantly, the harassment campaign against Dakota ended immediately and completely. No more social media comments appeared on her accounts. No more whispered insults followed her through hallways. No more organized exclusion from group projects occurred in any of her classes. Megan and Ashley seemed confused by Cassidy's sudden disinterest in tormenting Dakota, but neither of them pressed for explanations when their questions were deflected or ignored. The fake Instagram account that had been posting charity case updates was deleted without explanation, disappearing as suddenly as it had appeared. Ashley approached Dakota a week later, stopping by her locker between classes while other students hurried past in the typical rush to reach their next period before the tardy bell. "I wanted to apologize," Ashley said quietly, her voice barely audible above the hallway noise, "about what happened before Thanksgiving break. On the stairs." Dakota closed her locker and turned to face Ashley directly. "I know you didn't want to be there. That doesn't make it okay. I should have stopped her. I should have gotten help immediately after you fell. I should have told the truth when the school investigated." "No," Dakota said thoughtfully. "It doesn't make it okay, but it makes it understandable, and it makes it forgivable." Ashley nodded, clearly struggling with emotions she probably hadn't expected to feel. "Cassidy's been acting really weird lately, like she's scared of something or someone. She won't talk about what's bothering her." "Maybe she finally realized that actions have consequences," Dakota suggested. "Maybe, but I think it's more than that. I think someone taught her that not everyone is going to be a victim forever." Word spread quickly through Millfield Regional's complex social ecosystem that something fundamental had shifted in the relationship between Dakota and Cassidy. Students who had previously avoided Dakota out of fear of becoming targets themselves began including her in conversations, study groups, and social activities. Her academic performance improved dramatically now that she was no longer spending mental energy on harassment avoidance strategies and social navigation. She joined the debate team and discovered she had a talent for competitive argumentation when it was contained within established rules and clear boundaries. Most importantly for her family's stability, Marcus was able to return to his regular work schedule at the lumber mill, which helped them begin paying down the medical debt they had accumulated during Dakota's recovery period. 3 weeks after the computer lab confrontation, Mrs. Patterson called Dakota in for a scheduled follow-up meeting to assess her readjustment to school life following her extended absence. "I wanted to check in with you," Mrs. Patterson said, reviewing Dakota's academic progress reports and attendance records. "How are you feeling about your return to classes?" "Much better than I expected," Dakota replied honestly. "My grades are back on track, and I'm not having any more problems with social harassment." "That's wonderful to hear. Any particular reason why things have improved so dramatically?" Dakota considered her answer carefully, weighing honesty against discretion. "I think some people realized that picking on someone who was recovering from serious injuries wasn't a good look for them. Well, whatever the reason, I'm pleased with your progress. You seem much more confident lately, more willing to participate in class discussions and school activities. I learned a lot during my recovery period about standing up for myself and not accepting situations that aren't acceptable. Self-advocacy is definitely an important skill, Mrs. Patterson agreed. Just remember that there are always adults here who are willing to help if you need support. If Mrs. Patterson suspected there was more to Dakota's transformation than she was sharing, she didn't press for additional details. The guidance counselor's primary concern was student welfare, and Dakota was clearly thriving in ways that hadn't been possible during the first months of the school year. Spring semester passed without any significant incidents involving Cassidy or her former associates. Cassidy found new ways to occupy her time that didn't involve targeting other students for harassment. She became more involved in student council activities, volunteer work through her father's church, and college preparation activities that would help her transition away from Millfield Regional. Megan gradually drifted into different social circles, apparently recognizing that her association with Cassidy was no longer providing the social benefits it had offered during their harassment campaigns. Ashley began spending more time with academically focused students who shared her interests in science and mathematics. Dakota continued training with her father in their garage gym, not because she expected to need those skills again, but because the discipline and physical conditioning had become valuable parts of her daily routine. The training sessions provided structure, built confidence, and maintained the capabilities that had allowed her to resolve her conflict with Cassidy decisively. Violence should always be the last resort, Marcus reminded her during one of their evening training sessions in late spring. But knowing you can defend yourself effectively changes how you move through the world. People can sense confidence, and predators usually look for easier targets. I understand, Dakota said, working through combinations on the heavy bag, with both hands now fully functional and stronger than they had been before her injury. But I also learned that sometimes bullies only understand strength. All the conflict resolution and administrative intervention in the world wouldn't have stopped Cassidy. She only stopped when she realized I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. Marcus studied his daughter's technique as she continued working the bag, noting the precision and control she had developed over the past several months. She had grown up considerably since the stairwell incident, transforming from someone who tried to avoid conflict into someone who understood her own capabilities and wasn't afraid to use them when absolutely necessary. Just remember, he said finally, the strongest people are those who don't need to prove their strength regularly. What you did was necessary and justified, but it should remain an exception rather than becoming a pattern. I'll remember, Dakota promised, but I'll also remember that justice doesn't always come from institutions or authorities. Sometimes you have to create it yourself. The school year concluded without further confrontation between Dakota and Cassidy. Cassidy graduated with honors and accepted admission to a prestigious private college in another state, where her father's financial contributions ensured she would have opportunities to start fresh without the complications of her Millfield regional reputation. Before leaving for college, Cassidy made one final approach to Dakota, stopping her in the hallway after their last shared class of senior year. I wanted to say something before I leave, Cassidy said quietly, her voice lacking the confident malice that had characterized their previous interactions. I'm listening, Dakota replied. I'm not going to apologize because we both know I don't mean it, but I want you to know that I learned something from our situation. What did you learn? That there are people in the world who won't stay down when you knock them down, and that those people are more dangerous than anyone else because they have nothing left to lose. Dakota nodded thoughtfully. That's probably the most honest thing you've ever said to me. Yeah, well, don't get used to it. Cassidy walked away without another word, and Dakota never saw her again. Years later, when Dakota was working as a victim's advocate with the State Attorney General's office, she would think about that final conversation and recognize it as a moment of genuine learning for both of them. Cassidy had learned that power based on wealth and social status had limitations when confronted with determined resistance. Dakota had learned that justice sometimes required taking personal risks that institutions weren't willing to take on behalf of victims. Dakota graduated from Millfield Regional with highest honors and earned a full academic scholarship to study criminal justice at the State University. Her personal statement for college applications focused on her interest in helping victims of violence navigate systems that weren't always designed to protect vulnerable people effectively. She continued training in martial arts throughout college, eventually earning black belt rankings in multiple disciplines. But she never needed to use those skills in anger again, because the confidence and bearing they provided served as better deterrents than the techniques themselves. During her senior year of college, Dakota received a letter from Ashley Chen, who was completing pre-med studies at a different university. The letter included an apology for Ashley's role in the stairwell incident and an explanation of how that experience had motivated Ashley to pursue medicine as a way of helping rather than harming people. "I still have nightmares sometimes about seeing you at the bottom of those stairs," Ashley wrote. "Not just because of what we did to you, but because of what it revealed about who I was capable of becoming if I didn't make better choices about the people I associated with and the actions I was willing to enable through my silence." Dakota wrote back, thanking Ashley for her honesty and encouraging her medical career. She never heard from Megan Torres. When Dakota thought about her time at Millfield Regional High School, she felt a complex mixture of emotions: regret for the pain and financial hardship her family had endured, gratitude for the lessons she had learned about resilience and self-reliance, satisfaction with the way she had ultimately resolved a situation that could have continued indefinitely without decisive action. She never regretted her response to Cassidy in the computer lab. It had been calculated, proportional, and effective. More importantly, it had ended a pattern of systematic harassment without escalating into something worse or more destructive. Sometimes, Dakota realized, the best way to stop a predator was to demonstrate that their intended victim was no longer afraid of them. And sometimes that demonstration required showing that fear and power could flow in both directions. The weight of gravity had pulled Dakota down those concrete stairs and taught her about helplessness, vulnerability, and the limitations of institutional protection. But gravity also powered the response that taught Cassidy about consequences, accountability, and the reality that actions in the world had effects that couldn't always be controlled or predicted. In both cases, what went up eventually came down. The difference was learning to control the direction of the fall and understanding that sometimes justice required taking that control into your own hands rather than waiting for someone else to provide it. Dakota kept her father's old Marine Corps t-shirts, even though she eventually outgrew them and developed her own sense of personal style. They served as reminders of lessons learned during the most difficult period of her adolescence, when she had discovered the difference between being a victim and being vulnerable, and had chosen to be neither.